Hi, this is SpookyRecapped here, and today I'm going to recap the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010. The movie starts out at a diner in Springwood. A guy named Dean is sitting in a booth, asking for another cup of coffee, but he is ignored. He gets up from the booth and follows the waitress into the kitchen. All the pots are on fire. When turning around again, something cuts his hand, and Dean wakes up. When checking his hand, he is bleeding from the cut. Dean's friend, Chris, comes to the diner to see him. He starts telling her about his dreams and how he's afraid of getting killed inside them. He accidentally spills his coffee on Chris, and she gets up to go clean it off. While she is gone, Dean falls asleep and gets attacked by the burned man with knives on his gloves. He cuts his own throat right in front of her, making her scream. We're now at Dean's funeral. Chris is there as well, and she notices a little girl with marks on her body. A burned hand grabs the girl's foot, and Chris wakes up. After the service, Chris looks at some old photos of her and Dean from when they were kids. Her ex-boyfriend, Jesse, comes over. Chris doesn't understand how there are photos of them together, as they didn't meet until high school. A girl named Nancy comes over and says that she believes Chris. Nancy's mom comes over and tells her it's time to go home. At night, Nancy is sitting in her bed. The wall behind her starts moving, waking her up. Chris is sitting in her house, looking at some old photographs. Her mom comes in, and Chris asks her where the rest of the photos are. She says that they're probably in the garage, so Chris goes out there. She goes to the attic of the garage and finds an old box containing the same ripped dress she saw on the little girl at the funeral. She gets knocked down by the burned man, but wakes up in her own bed, screaming. The next day at school, Chris is having a hard time staying awake in class. She realizes that she's dreaming once again when everyone turns to Cole. The burned man is there, almost cutting her face, when Chris wakes up, screaming in class. Some of her hair has been cut, so she packs her books and leaves the class in a hurry. Chris is home alone, and she is struggling to stay awake. She gets up to close the window of her room, but Jesse appears, scaring her. They both sit down on the bed, and Chris asks Jesse to stay the night. She wakes up at night to the sound of her dog making noise outside. She goes outside to find him, but sees the burned man is there again, and Chris runs into the house. But when she gets inside, the house has changed into an old preschool. The little girl from earlier grabs her hand, leading Chris to the burned man, who is counting down. Fortunately, she wakes up. She goes to the bathroom to get some water in her face. When she comes back, Chris lays down in the bed, but the man is right next to her. Jesse wakes up as Chris starts to levitate. She is getting turned around and gets cut. Jesse freaks out and runs out of the house. He gets to Nancy's house, scaring her. Jesse tells her what happened, and Nancy remembers the burned man's name, Freddy. Jesse leaves, and the police soon catches him. He is arrested and taken to jail. Nancy calls a friend, Quentin, and asks him to meet at the library. Quentin gets to the library and does some research on sleep deprivation. He falls asleep in front of the computer and wakes up to a little girl looking at him. He follows the little girl into a room where Freddy sits. As Freddy turns his head, Quentin gets woken up by Nancy. Jesse is inside the jail cell when a guard opens the door and says he's free to go. But when he walks out of the cell, he looks behind him, and Jesse is now standing directly against the wall, and the room has changed. Jesse starts walking around. When he turns around, Freddy is there, slowly walking towards him. Jesse starts running. Freddy catches up to Jesse and stabs him through the back. Inside the prison cell, his cellmate shouts for help. Jesse is hanging upside down while Freddy tells him that they have 6 more minutes to play before he dies. Nancy and Quentin are still at the library when he takes a pill he uses to stay awake. Later at night, Nancy goes to take a bath. She lays down in the tub and sets an alarm on her phone. As she is starting to fall asleep, Freddy's hand emerges from the water. Nancy is woken up by her mom, knocking on the door, asking if she's okay. When she leaves the bathroom, her own room has started snowing. She keeps walking, but is suddenly in front of a preschool. Freddy appears behind her, telling her to remember him. Her phone rings, and she wakes up. When she picks up the phone, it is Quentin, who tells her that Jesse is dead. Quentin comes over and they start looking for clues about the preschool. Nancy finds a hidden document containing a photograph of her old preschool class. Nancy's mom comes in, asking what they're doing. Nancy's mom starts telling a story about the gardener at the preschool called Fred Krueger. We flash back to the day of the photo. He lived in the basement of the school, and he loved the children. Nancy was his favorite. One day, the parents start to notice strange bruises on their children. Little Nancy tells her mom that Freddy takes them to a secret cave, and she starts crying. The flashback ends. Nancy and Quentin gets in the car, but Nancy thinks that there has to be more to it. Quentin's dad pulls up, demanding him to get in the car. He obeys, gets in his dad's car, and they drive off. Nancy goes to a study room and starts looking up all the names in the photograph. Meanwhile, Quentin is struggling to stay awake at swimming practice. When swimming his laps, he is dragged underwater. When he reaches the surface, he is in a completely different place. He sees Freddy running away from the parents' cars. He runs into an old building to escape. The parents can't get into the building, so they light a gas canister and throws it through the window. He runs out of the door in flames right towards Quentin. Quentin wakes up as he has been pulled out of the pool. Nancy is watching videos of one of the kids from the preschool who talks about being too scared to go to sleep when Quentin approaches her. The two of them confront Quentin's father about what they did to Freddy. They accuse him of killing an innocent man as they didn't go to the police first. Quentin storms out and Nancy follows him. She tries to calm him down. All of a sudden, Nancy hears someone call her name. She sees a body bag being dragged away. She's experiencing micronaps, so she's dreaming while she's awake. Nancy and Quentin drive to a local pharmacy. To get Quentin's prescription filled, someone knocks on the car door, and it's Freddy, pulling Nancy out on the ground. She luckily wakes up. The pharmacist tells Quentin that he is out of refills. Trying to stay awake, Nancy burns her arm with a cigarette ignition. She walks into the pharmacy, but as she slowly sleepwalks, it is turned into a boiler room. Freddy starts to appear right in front of her. He cuts her arm and she wakes up on the floor of the pharmacy. Quentin rushes over and sees that she is badly injured, so they drive to the hospital. Her mom shows up at the hospital, asking Nancy who did this to her. Meanwhile, Quentin steals a couple of adrenaline shots from the nurse's cart. When the nurse in Nancy's room tries to sedate her, the nurse's hand turns into Freddy's glove. She freaks out and refuses to be sedated. The nurse talks to her mom outside the room, asking her to sign a document, but when they return to the room, Nancy is gone. Quentin and Nancy are driving away. While driving, Freddy appears in the middle of the road, making them crash the car. They get out of the car and keeps walking until they find their old preschool. Quentin breaks the glass of the door, and they go inside. They go down to the basement and discovers Freddy's old room. When looking around, they discover a hidden door leading to a secret room. Nancy starts having flashbacks of herself and Freddy being down there. Quentin finds a stack of old Polaroids. Nancy asks what is on the pictures, and Quentin says that they're all of her. She grabs the photos and looks at them, and starts crying. Quentin realizes that Freddy is after them because they told the truth, not because they lied. Nancy gets an idea when she looks at the piece of sweater she pulled out of the dream. She will fall asleep and have Quentin wake her up so she can pull Freddy out to the real world. She lays down in a bed while Quentin finds a sharp weapon. Quentin sits down with the weapon, but unfortunately, he falls asleep as well. He is now in the boiler room, and Freddy grabs him and cuts his chest. Before he's able to kill him, Nancy calls Freddy. Freddy appears behind Nancy. She pushes Freddy and starts running away. All of a sudden, she's at her own house again. She sees Freddy coming down the stairs, so she hides in the closet. But Freddy is right behind her, so she runs out of the closet and up the stairs. When running through the hallway, the floor turns liquid. She falls through the floor and lands in her bed, wearing her old dress. Freddy comes in and starts throwing her around. She grabs a pair of scissors and stabs him in the eye, but he just pulls it out like nothing happened. Freddy pins her to the bed, and she starts screaming. Luckily, Quentin wakes up. He tries waking up Nancy as well, but he's unsuccessful. He gets a shot ready and injects her right in the heart. Nancy pulls Freddy out of the dream into the real world. They all start fighting, and Freddy stabs Quentin with his glove. When Freddy is about to slice Quentin, Nancy cuts his hand off. She cuts Freddy's throat, and he falls down. She sets the room on fire, and they leave. An ambulance and firefighters arrive at the scene, and the two of them are driven away. Nancy and her mom returns home later that night. When Nancy's mom stands in front of the mirror, Freddy appears behind her. He stabs Nancy's mom through the head and goes back in the mirror. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe for more content like this, and stay spooked, people.